I'll go ahead and start recording. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome back. For many of those who have participated in the past, we're very happy to have Daniel Bryan and Chel Viteri here from the Pachaysana Institute. Last autumn, they conducted a series of workshops on epistemic justice for us. And this semester, they will be exploring a series of workshops on storytelling for social change, which we're very excited about, and I think link in with many of the courses and the discussions that we're having on our campus and across the university. So I just welcome. We're so delighted to have you back. We felt that the workshops last semester were incredibly productive. They really fostered a lot of discussion and application of methods in our classes. And we look forward to more opportunities to do the same this semester with the series of workshops on storytelling for social change. So with that, I will turn it over to Daniel and Chev.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And as it was last semester, we're delighted to be here. This is one of the things that I know in Pachaysana, especially among Chel, Grace and myself, where we really look forward to these sessions. Grace, first of all, for those who were here last semester, sends her best. She did have an urgency with her family that she had to tend to today, and we knew that from starting yesterday, but she will hopefully be spending time with us in the workshops, but she does send her best to everyone. We thought, since we're a smaller group, and there's so many advantages of having a smaller group, especially here at the front end, that if everybody could just say a little bit of what brings you to this space, because of the participants, it looks like half are new. At least they were not here last semester that I remember. So I'd love to just hear what brings you to this space. And then after that, we will do a move into the main activities of the day, and also present ourselves after you all present yourselves. So it'd be great. And even those who are not new, those who were here last semester, if you could also share what's bringing you back to this space that we're in. And so if it's okay with everybody, you always feel free to pass. I'll start off by calling on someone, and then that person can graciously ask the next person to join in. So maybe Tamron, you could start since you're a returnee.
Sure. Hi, I'm Tamron. I'm in the Arts Administration, Education, and Policy program at Ohio State, and a first-year PhD student. And I joined the workshops last semester, and I'm returning because I feel like I got so much out of both learning the new ways of approaching kind of new ideas, even using the Zoom platform in different ways than I was used to, that we integrated into some of the classes that I was in with Dr. Fletcher, but also for the community, for really having a space on Fridays every couple of weeks to come together and to learn and unlearn from different people beyond my physical one room space, So I'm really excited about this semester and and the workshop. So I'm so happy to be here. Great to see everyone again. And I'm gonna
we always do, after somebody shares, we always do recognition of some kind. You can go like this, do that, or throw up one of your Zoom reactions.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pass this off to Alice and have her introduce herself. She's, I think, new this semester to the group.
Hi, everybody. So I'm still settling in because I just got back from outside. So I don't know why I really wanted to join last semester, but I only heard about it until after everything ended. So I heard from Anna Freeman. I was talking to her about my interest in understanding critical spaces and a possibility for healing. So I'm just exploring that. So many people have recommended this to me. So yeah, I'm here. And this I didn't join last time was purely because of my fault. It was just a saturation of too many emails, way too many emails. So I feel like, yeah, I need to get on top of things. Thank you all. Okay.
Can you choose our next person?
Okay, Emily.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Emily. I'm in the Public History MA program here at OSU. And I'm heard about this because I'm working in the curator group with Michelle this semester. So what really kind of drew me to this set of workshops specifically is the focus on storytelling, because I'm really interested in alternative forms of storytelling and the whole aspect of narrative when it comes to historical studies. So I was really excited to see that as the main theme for this semester. So I'm excited to explore that now with you guys. So, and then I will choose Anne.
Hi, I'm new here. I am Anne Drozd. I'm the museum coordinator at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum. And I'm trying to remember how this came to my attention. I think that it popped up either in an email newsletter or I don't remember exactly how I found out about this, but I was intrigued by the possibility of exploring storytelling and social change and different ways of looking at story and narrative, because I'm always looking for new exhibits that we can bring to the Billy Ireland and new ways of looking at cartoon art and comics. And there's so much happening online now with cartoonists who are sharing their stories as things are happening in the world. And I want to see how we can look at those stories differently and how we can bring more people into using our collections and also collect stories as they're happening in the world too. And let's see, who hasn't gone yet? Has Chelsea gone? All right, Chelsea.
Hi everyone. I'm really happy to be here again with you all. Last semester was also really powerful for us in discovering how can we build community like virtually, as well as think critically and keep it creative. So I'm really happy and excited to come back and focus on storytelling, because now we can also, after having like a lot of discussions on epistemic justice, storytelling can be such a powerful tool. So the idea of creating together is really, I'm just really excited to see what'll happen during our time together. So yeah, I'll invite Michelle.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be back, and I'm so happy to have everyone back here as well. I'm the lead co-PI for the Cachawidaikuna, Andean and Amazonian Indigenous Arts and Humanities. And Cachawidaikuna means messages with beauty. It kind of, yes, and for me, it's also she, her, hers, just in case. But the concept of Cachawidaikuna was born from thinking about attention to material culture production as storytelling, as narrative, and all of the documentation that exists in some of the material culture that we have in a small collection, but also more generally in terms of linking to indigenous epistemologies. I'm also, like Emily mentioned, interested in the concepts of narrativizing history. Who decides, what story to tell, what stories sort of get perpetuated in our society, what voices are omitted in that telling, and not just in terms of the histories, right, the content of them, but also in the ways of telling. Yeah, so the different methods behind, telling the stories. So that's a little bit about my interest in the group. And I will pass it on to Richard, I guess.
Thanks, Michelle. So yeah, my name is Richard Fletcher. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Arts, Administration, Education and Policy and a co-PI in the Quechua group. I attended these sessions last semester and also helped run our distance Unlearning hour. And I'm especially interested in what brings us all here in relation to storytelling. I think I had my formation as an academic came from the study of ancient Mediterranean cultures, and but I'm moving more into questions of indigenous art making and knowledge, and that shift is kind of important to register a kind of unlearning of certain ways of being and ways of doing things, and also acknowledging the limits of my own positionality in this. And also, as my name suggests, I was in a class about philosophical problems in the arts, and we were thinking about internet art, and we were talking about the writings of Hito Steyl, an artist, and she writes about spam and representation, and naming seems to be a really interesting opening question about storytelling. You know, a name can, our own names and what we call ourselves, including pronouns, can also be a kind of starting point. So there's more to the spam story, and so I can unpack that if we need to as well. But I also write under a pseudonym of Minus Plato as well. So I'm quite interested in stories and naming as we get through. Thanks. Daniel, did you introduce yourself?
No, but I will very, very quickly. So what brings me to this space is obviously the relationship that we've been forming over this year with OSU, but also the desire to keep learning and having stories, for me, drop more into my body. In academia, you know, we focus pretty much on this. You know, if I was on Zoom and just that, it really wouldn't matter, really, because that's all that tends to matter in Zoom. But the whole idea is, can we somehow get to all of this and bring it into our space, and how can I get more in touch with linking that body-mind connection and seeing how Zoom and the dialogue with you all can continue to bring it out in me, and form those connections that are not just these kind of mind connections, but these mind-body connections. And also, this is the work that Pachaysana does. We're here to learn and keep growing as an organization, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But before that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chell.
Sweet. So we're gonna start off with a land acknowledgement. So I'm gonna ask you all, if you feel comfy, you can close your eyes, or if not, you can maybe like just find a place of focus, maybe like your hands. And you're gonna just start by noticing your breath and arriving to the space. And I'm gonna ask you to try and become very perceptive. Last time we talked about radical listening. Maybe focus on the different stories that you hold, that your body holds, that your being holds. Trying to perceive that interconnection between all those stories. Feeling how story creates us, shapes us. Acknowledging the stories that wound us, the stories that have been violent. Also acknowledging the stories that give us power, the stories that heal us. And the story is about interconnection. We're gonna take a step back and connect with the land that we're on. What are all the different links that we have to the land that we're on? And just like we took a moment to acknowledge our stories, we're going to take a moment to acknowledge the stories that the land has to tell. Maybe picture the mountains or the rivers or the deserts that surround you. Holding once again also the stories that have been violent to the land, violent to people. And by naming that violence, we acknowledge that we're on stolen land. In my case, on the land of the Kitukaras. But we also connect with the stories of healing that the land has, the stories of resilience and connection that land and people have created and continue to create. And now we're slowly gonna return back. But on your journey back, I'm gonna ask you to find the links between the stories of your body, of your being, and the stories of this land, and the stories of the people from this land. And imagine as you're slowly like webbing or knitting your way back. Just sitting with this feeling of interconnectedness by story. We're gonna take a deep inhale and a long exhale. One more deep inhale. And on our exhale, I'm gonna invite you to open your eyes gently. Coming back to the space. And with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Daniel. Wait, no, that's not what I wanted to do.
Thank you, Chell.
There we are.
What we're going to ask everyone to do now is see if we can just share a bit of impact about the main words we're going to be using over this semester, which are story and social change. So Last semester, we did a little bit of work in the chat and did what's called call and response. So people would put some words in the chat and we would respond by reading those exact words. So it's hearing your words back in the space, maybe not exactly how you would have read them or thought them, but that's also part of the activity. So what we're going to do is start with this word story. And everyone is just going to place a word or phrase, try to keep the words limited at this moment, but a word or phrase that reflects how you think or feel when you hear the word story. Connection, vulnerable, connection, meaning, family, sharing, coherence, interwoven ideas, attention, viewpoint, only one of many, perspective, creation, naming, curiosity, reliving, learning, humanizing. Okay, we're going to leave it at that for now. And we're going to now do the same experiment with the phrase social change, but you'll hear a different voice reading back your words. Social change.
Hope, free thinking, movement, community, justice, active. Creating collective together, conceptual in hand with structural. Necessary, connection across groups, consciousness. Open boundaries, listening to others, care. How hard will it be? Reimagining.
With that reimagining, and this last one, maybe we could also read cello.
Change towards what as an alternative.
With those, and restructuring. With those, we're going to transition a little bit into telling you just briefly about who Pachaysana is. But before we do that, I want to recognize all these words that are now filling the space. And beyond the words, they're all symbols. They all represent stories in and of themselves. They all represent lived realities. They represent each one of us individually, yet also this, as we heard here, this idea of an interconnected weaving here in this space. So that's really what we're working for, is finding ways to interconnect these different stories and not dictate what social change means for everybody, but interconnecting in a way that inspires a connection with all these different words and all these different kind of questions that we have here in terms of like, how hard will it be? Is it necessary? You know, it's interesting just to take all these words that we have and the way that Chell and I read them, but also thinking the ones as that don't have the question mark as questions, because that's what we're also here to do. So Chell, let's advance to the next slide and talk a little bit about Pachaysana and what's going to be happening today, as well as over this semester and our different interventions. So for those who were not here last semester, Pachaysana is a small Ecuadorian organization. It's a nonprofit focused on education, but also in community development and also research, and weaving all those together in this world, in this pluriversal world that we like to consider that we all live in. Pacha and Aysana are two Quechua words fused together. So if you have studied quite a bit of the Andean region, and if Quechua just sounded rare because maybe you've done a little more studies on Bolivia or Peru, we refer to the language and people in Ecuador as Quechuas, not Quechuas. So Pacha and Aysana mean balanced world, or the balanced time-space continuum that we live in. And basically what we do as an organization is we create education and research programs that link both local and global perspectives, local and global ways of being and knowing our world, and trying to really reimagine what development means according to these different realities, and seeking transformation of how we do education. We love this Unlearning hour because when people often ask us, well, what's your bottom line at Pachaysana? And we often say, you know, our bottom line is the complete and utter transformation of education as we know it in our world today. Now, people often chuckle at that, but it's because when they hear that, think, oh, Pachaysana is going to do that on their own. But that's the whole point of what we're working on. We're one of many, and we see our role as one thread or one block, one design of that giant quilt that will weave these changes. We've been working with Ohio State for a few years now, most especially through a fair trade decolonial study abroad program that we have called Rehearsing Change, which I'll talk about, not so much the study abroad program, but if anybody's interested in our community-based study abroad program, they can write or let us know or ask questions later. But we'll talk about the concepts behind it and what Rehearsing Change really means. So with that, what are we going to be doing today? Today, we're going to be exploring story and setting up the workshops that we'll be doing, the 3 workshops over this semester. We're going to be exploring stories as ways of knowing, the elements of story and storytelling, although not as you would learn in a literature class, and really try to connect this idea of stories as unlearning. And finally, the idea is that throughout this process, we're going to be dreaming and creating together. And today is just another beginning, or for those who were here last semester, kind of a re-beginning of that dreaming and creating together.
So when we think of this question of like really, what do we mean when we say storytelling for social change? And the way that we understand it is as the stories that are planted in the cracks. And what we mean by cracks, it's like sort of like every system. And when we think, for example, of like the educational system that Daniel is talking about, that we want to so passionately change. To go about it, there's a lot of like cracks and like broken parts of this system. And we believe that those are the places where, what would it mean to, like, what are the stories that those places have to share And what are the stories that we can plant there so that maybe we can create, whether it's a bigger crack or maybe it's a garden within a concrete space. So when we think about storytelling and social change, we believe that stories are definitely powerful, and stories are the way that we understand and the way that the world is shaped. So through stories and through planting stories in these cracks and these fissures, we believe that though social change can take a really long time, but that's the process of it. Without story, it's hard to imagine real social change.
So our work is thinking about those cracks is very much rooted in popular pedagogy and also theater. So the storytelling we do is usually embodied, comes from a theatrical technique called theater of the oppressed from Augusto Boal. But of course, also a lot of our grounding is in Paulo Freire and pedagogy of the oppressed. And so when you think about those cracks, you know, just look at those. And we did this, I think, last semester, but look at those little cracks between our screens. Probably at the top of your screen right now is where you have them. There are these little cracks between Chell and Michelle or whoever is next to you. And that idea is seeing that as part of a structure, but an opportunity where we have to identify what that crack is. How do we name it? Similar to what Richard was talking about, the importance of naming. And so we take that seed, identify the crack, plant it, and in the cultivation of that story that we're planting, we seek to transform, which is basically the essence of Freire and Boal, which is to identify conflicts and transform them in our world, and in doing so, transform the system. A lot of our work in social justice is also related to epistemic justice, which is what we worked on last semester. So when we talk about stories, we're also thinking about all these different ways of knowing in our world. Different people expressed already their interests in indigenous epistemologies and alternative ways of knowing. And we hope that when we talk about storytelling, we also eliminate the preconceived notions about what a story is. For example, a story's got to have a big climactic bang, for example, and a catharsis. Boal would say that is one of the most oppressive aspects of a story, because it's someone basically manipulating a story to get you to feel in a certain way. And that brings us to this idea of rehearsing change, which is also the name of our study abroad program. We believe we need to create rehearsal rooms where we gather together to look for those cracks, to identify them as a collective, not as one individual, and start to expand those cracks. Imagine that crack growing into a space that we all inhabit. We create the story, leave it as a seed in that crack, and then we move on to the next crack. But we have to keep coming back, because we have to keep cultivating what we've planted there. So that's what we mean by rehearsing change. Oh, this is also me. Sorry about that. And so it's really important. Chelsea was talking about stories, you know, and how they can manipulate. A lot of our preconceived notions come from this commercial storytelling. If you were to go on Amazon and put storytelling in Amazon.com, pretty much everything that's going to come out is related to marketing. How do you use stories to sell your product? And so we like to distinguish between commercial and storytelling for social change. So this idea of going from telling and selling to listening and building. The idea of going through this idea of presenting a conflict over an arc of time and then resolving that conflict in a packaged way that makes you feel a certain way. It's really focused on naming a conflict in a shared time and space with a collective. One is very heavily curated, right? The stories that we're so used to. And I know we have somebody here from a museum, you know, it's like, how do you package this? And how do we get it so that it's clear and it's saying what we want it to say? And that's all great for certain types of expressions and certain structures. But it also, we have to be able to celebrate that messiness. Social change, as we've been witnessing in the social movements going on just recently, is very messy. And it's also part of something bigger. So all these seeds that are planted in these cracks is not just that one plant, it's part of some kind of ecosystem.
So then just centering once again on like, what is it about stories? And really stories have been central to the survival of humans and our ability to tell stories and through stories connect with one another has created like trust within groups that before, when we were like hunters and gatherers, we were actually able to organize in big groups of people. And our ability of being good storytellers is what really made us rise in the food chain. And it also stories are what give like meaning to our lives. It's really hard to imagine what would a life without storytelling look like, and could we find meaning without storytelling? So really, storytelling is just central to who we are as a species.
There's also this idea that, not just an idea, there's science being explored about how physiologically we're stories. There's evidence and still being studied that babies on their first day of being born have neurons that are developed in which they can mirror their parents, for example, or whoever it is with whom they are at that moment. And so there's this idea of the neurons in our brain are actually wired to mirror, which is so beautiful, because when we come back to Boal, he would say that the most powerful part of being human is that we can see in the act of seeing. Right? So we are basically walking mirrors of life and of our internal world, of the external world at all time. And so, but to think about that also happening physiologically inside us makes it really exciting. It also is exciting to think about this as, you've surely heard the phrase fire and wire, and how neurons, for example, when you're meditating or when you learn something new and you're like, whoa, mind blown, right? It's a physiological aspect that's happening. And how can we think about the physiological nature of our body also being connected to telling stories and finding ways to interconnect them? You've surely done that when you're telling a story and you hear somebody else tell a story and there's like interconnections, the same thing happens, but maybe instead of here, you feel it here. It's like, whoa, we're so connected here. Our stories are so interconnected. And so that's the idea. Our bodies really are made for stories as well. And when you watch a movie, when you read a book, when you hear a story, your body reacts to that story almost as it does, in fact, exactly as it does physiologically to a real life situation happening. So when you watch a movie, that same thing is happening. Some studies show it happens even more so in a movie because of how desensitized we've become to events in our world and violence in our world. If we can invest in a character or characters or that story, we'll actually feel it more. And so the idea is making those connections from story to our body to life. And how can we find physiological connections and physical connections, and not just those mental and especially academic connections.
So back again to this idea that like storytelling is what makes us human, and thinking about the fact that we need stories just like we need food. Stories are like so part of the core of who we are. So when we try to imagine our lives without stories, it's just simply not possible. We're also really drawn to conflict. So even when you think of like when you're talking on the phone with a friend and they ask you about how your life is going, a lot of times what we focus on is the conflict, is like where is that, you know, what's happening at work, like this is, and then we follow with like telling a whole story of how we have this conflict at work. So it's also through stories that in some ways we're able to grow, because without conflict we also don't grow. So we're drawn to conflict, and also through stories we're able to understand it, navigate it, share it, explore it. And even though, of course, there's different forms of storytelling, there's different ways of understanding and seeing the world, right? But at the end of the day, storytelling across the globe is central to the human experience. And really, like, the way that our minds are wired from when we were hunters and gatherers continues to be the same, which is a mind that is like shaped for and shaped by story.
And that takes us to the elements of storytelling. We will not be working in these workshops on narrative elements that you may learn in a literature class, such as plot and characters. But we will be working on conflict from different perspectives. And of course, we'll be integrating characters and plots and all that, but that's not what our focus will be. For example, what are the elements that we'll be focusing on? One is this idea of being the spectator. It's one of the most important aspects of Boal's work, in which he sees everyone being more than just a spectator and an actor within a given theatrical experience or in a story. It's beyond being the actor teller of that story and the others are consuming that story, that at all times we are spectacting. And so that's something that we'll be exploring and asking you to be thinking about and feeling through as we work on this. And this idea also of the in-between. Boal was fascinated by the idea of the in-between, the spectator and the actor, the in-between the character and the actor. So the in-between of the rehearsal for the revolution and the revolution. And so he took a word from Aristotle, metaxis, and really started to play with this, but is asking us to really engage with our nature as human beings of living in different in-betweens, which we'll explore through storytelling.
Another element that we want to play with is telling stories with and from the land, and not only like about the land. So in some ways, like, another beautiful part of being humans is this ability of like imagining and also empathizing. So what does it mean to like maybe sit beside a river and radically listen to the river and strive and like listen to the story of the river? And then how do you proceed to tell the story with the river? So also in the ways that we create story, we really want to try and be intentional about like also stepping outside of only our perspective and being able to empathize with the trees, with the birds, and then also like with our community. Like how can we tell stories then together between us? Another element is also like, yeah, empowering stories through symbols. Symbols are a really powerful thing. And we interact with symbols on the daily, and symbols carry a lot of power. So even when we think about a symbol, like a national symbol, like a flag, like that flag is telling a story, right? And a lot of times we might also be surrounded by a lot of symbols that maybe tell stories that continue to be violent. So how can we also maybe rethink our symbols? How can we redefine our symbols? And how can we also find power in that action of whether it's naming the violence of the symbols, or maybe it's finding opportunities of healing and growth and community through other symbols?
And that brings us back to this idea of interconnecting, which will be a lot of, as we mentioned, the work that we do. And I'll use this image here as an example of what interconnecting is about in terms of achieving empowerment. Here you see a group of people that actually created this mural that they're standing in front of. This mural is right in the middle of the park of the city of Lago Agrio, or Nueva Loja in Ecuador, which is basically the center, the oil capital of Ecuador. And this was different groups of people coming together to try to intertwine their stories into one mural. And in doing so, create not a single story, but that interwoven multiplicity of stories in one image there. But it wasn't just the image, it's the experience. So what it's so hard to communicate was through this mural was the experience of working together. So there was 2 different indigenous nationalities working. There was a community of what we call colonos, or people who settled in the Amazon, but also have been experiencing damages from the oil industry in their communities. And then also members of the organization that actually is leading the legal battle against Chevron Texaco in the area, because of the lengthy period of contamination and what that caused both culturally and environmentally has resulted in the largest class action lawsuit of human history. And so all those had to come together in one. It's that idea of the creating together that we're really going to try to get to and find the empowerment in that.
And just to like tell you a little bit of like what's coming up in the next workshops, we're gonna have, each workshop is sort of gonna focus on a different medium in some way, like a different way of telling stories. So the first one is gonna be focused on movement and embodiment. The second one is gonna be more focused on like words and sounds, music, voice. And the last one is gonna be focused on representing with symbols. So props, masks, objects, and using that to tell stories. So now we're gonna have like a more of like a little teaser, I guess, like a shorter workshop, and then these are the workshops that will follow.
But I think now what we wanted to do is open up just a brief space for comments, questions about what was just presented, so that everybody else had this opportunity to engage the space a little more academically or conceptually before we go into the moment of play. So we turn it over to you all and see if there's anything that you'd like to respond to or ask questions about.
I guess one thing that I'm very interested in, we'll probably explore this throughout, is this idea of not engaging so much with the kind of technicalities of storytelling or traditions that establish structure, and the reference to Aristotle, and thinking about the poetics and plot and all these kinds of things. And this is a question that I think a lot about, which is the mechanism of unlearning. Does it always demand a kind of a bringing to the surface what we kind of take for granted and what we are kind of establishing as our kind of ground from which we build? And it'd be kind of interesting to know if we all start from different places in that kind of recognition of what a story is. And I'm really interested in what Anne has to say as someone coming from the cartoon library and graphic narratives and things like that, in terms of is it important for us to register where we come to storytelling from and those traditions in order to unlearn, or even to be open to the methods that you're bringing from the Pachaysana Institute, so from Quito, from the Ecuadorian context.
I think that's a great comment, and there's a lot to be said about studying the system so that you can then transform that system to really understand how it's built. I guess the response I would make is it's the kind of thing that we learn all the time about stories, to go into characters and plot and work on the poetics, for example, feels as if, gosh, everybody pretty much, if you don't know the terms, you know that. And so it's as as someone works under the handle minus Plato, we could consider this group as kind of minus Aristotle to a certain degree, as not acknowledging with that phrase that the poetics are here, that the ways of doing storytelling are in our bodies, in our minds. We've consumed it all our lives, and we'll be bringing that out. But at least the proposal is to work a little less on those and a little more on other elements.
So I guess for me, maybe coming to that idea of what a story is, and thinking about like the way that we're trained to think of stories in a linear kind of way with a single author. One of the things that's striking from my fieldwork is that anytime anyone started to tell a story, multiple voices would join in, and so it was a multivocal storytelling that would take different turns every time it was told. So that was pretty exciting, in terms of that collective effort. The other thing that comes to my mind, and maybe Tamara and Emily can kind of comment on this a little bit, but the different ways of storytelling. So for example, from art, from indigenous art, what we see are circular narratives, in some cases, with no beginning, middle, or end, or no direction, no particular prescribed direction. We see stories that are told in different times, so the mythic time kind of comes into play with historical time, so it really starts interrupting, a very strict idea of how stories are supposed to unfold for us. And then maybe the last thought that I have, just kind of thinking a little bit with a little bit of sadness maybe about young children today, and not just young children, but everyone today kind of feeling like they're being thrown about by different events, and potentially losing that coherence of the whole, and how important stories are, to sort of maintain that personal integrity, and not just that, but like being able to imagine ourselves, in epic stories. Like what is the epic aspect of our, being, so I think a lot about that in terms of children, who have lost that sense of, having like, I don't know if destiny is a right word, or purpose, or epic story of their own, that brings sense to them. So. Tamara, maybe I'll kind of invite you to join in, but I love the project that you did last semester, with deep reading into one of the Cassandra Press readers, and how you reconstructed, like that story, or that reader, in so many different ways. It was really fascinating to see that possibility and how productive and it was.
Yeah, I mean, I found that kind of process of reading more like reading text that might feel inaccessible initially, but then with that revisiting, like, I revisited this text 4 times in different ways, and each time I revisited, I had a different way of engaging with it. A new, I was building on something, and it accumulated, and then kind of the way that I was able to process and engage with and kind of relate to and retell through an object, which it was like this physical kind of object that included text, but in a very different format. And actually I just finished reading, I'm in an arts-based research course this semester, and I just finished reading a chapter on poetic inquiry and the process of using poetic structures and approaches to engaging deeper with the research, the subjects, I guess, or the people that are the subject of the research. It's just a different way, and it just kind of thinking about how that's something I have maybe been doing in a way that I didn't realize was this, existing structure, and does have rules, and thinking about what does that mean to kind of operate and tell stories within those rules that we've learned and know, like you were talking about, Daniel. How do we get outside, go beyond that confidently and say this, this is how I'm seeing things, and how I'm also able to engage with other people and have, those kind of emotional connections and, through those stories.
I think one thing is really embracing the dreamlike nature of stories that we tend to discredit in the Western world because they're so messy. But something, as Michelle was talking about, Indigenous storytelling, is so much of it comes from the traditions that are held before dawn. For example, the Wayusadas, and drinking the Wayusa ceremonial tea in the morning and talking about your dreams from the day before. And when we've done those in rehearsing change, or just in our lives, of course, as Westerners, it's hard to follow a lot of what's being talked about, but you see that everybody else is following it just fine. There is absolutely no problem. And so it's with more and more time and more experiences in those Wayusadas, you start to really understand what that means, because you're not trying to make one event lead to the next event, lead to the next event. You actually might have events go like this or like that, or they're all over, and then you form them how you want. But what's also quite beautiful about this is we're working with one community who's trying to tell their story to serve their struggle against a mining company that's in their area. But in telling their story, it's been hard for them. We say, we're going to have to find a way to structure this in a Western way because that's who they are, or no one's going to understand it from their perspective. We don't want to colonize this story, but we have to figure out a way to kind of negotiate both worlds so that you're achieving also the goals that you want to achieve. So it plays in many different directions, this kind of work. Anyone else want to make a comment before we move on to playing? We don't want to, we always hate cutting things off, but we're also hesitant to not play. That's our nature as well.
This is all extremely interesting to me, coming from a point of view where we're trying to tell the story of the stories that we've collected in the museum, and thinking about different ways and that we can put these stories forward, and the different ways that the visitors are interpreting them and the stories that they're bringing to it. So this is all great for me to be unlearning what we've been doing and try to think of new ways to come into this, and think of the exhibitions that we're putting together as a story, and then there's the stories within those stories and all the stories that people are bringing in, like everything, like with the Western culture, and then how the circular stories of Indigenous, like we don't even think about that sometimes as we're building these. And to have that up front and have the curators thinking about that before we even start planning, I think is going to be extremely helpful. So this is great.
Can I ask a question, Anne? Do you all have comics as well in the museum, a comic book type approach?
You mean in the collection, or
in the collection, or pedagogically? Is that part of, because there is a difference between cartoons and comics, and I was just curious.
Yeah, so comic books, editorial cartoons, comic strips, newspaper comics. So anything that's telling the story. And then we were talking about the space in between, and that's so built into comics, because the gutters in between is really where the story happens, because it's where the reader is putting it all together and forming the story themselves. So it's interpreting that too. Yeah. Which
is the reason I asked, because comics are just have that interplay with the audience member more so than in so many other forms of storytelling that often goes underappreciated and under-discussed, that in between the blocks, right? And of course, there's I'm sure you know, but maybe others do not, but it's an older, slightly older book now, but Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud is used a lot in teaching storytelling, not just for comics, but going beyond that. It's his work has been instrumental in storytelling.
Sweet. So in the spirit of unlearning, we're gonna start off the more workshop-y part, and we're gonna play a game that is all about unlearning. So I'm curious, do people feel comfortable like walking around the space that they're at, or would you prefer to do this sitting down? Because we can have like we can adapt it. Generally, like if we can walk around the space, that would be great. But maybe like let me know like this if you're like, yeah, I can like walk around the space. Or maybe like this if you're like, I'm like in a place where I can't really do that. Okay, cool. So we're gonna do it sitting down, and we're gonna do a shorter version of it. So the game is called Walk Stop, but we won't walk and we won't stop. We'll clap and we'll blink. So whenever I say clap, you're gonna clap. And whenever I say blink, you're gonna blink. Are we good? Okay, so clap.
You got muted, Chell, just so you
know.
I was reading your
lips. That's so funny. So okay, we'll start it up again. So clap, 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 blink, blink, clap. Wonderful. So now we're gonna switch it up. And whenever I say clap, you're gonna blink. And whenever I say blink, you're gonna clap. So clap, clap, and blink, blink, clap, 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 blink, blink, clap, clap, blink, clap, blink, blink, clap. Sweet, y'all. So was someone able to do it like perfect?
No.
Cool. I'm curious, just how did it feel to switch these words and to like follow these commands?
It reminded me of the innate biases test where it keeps switching up to, you know, get at your innate biases. Yeah, because it has that element of disorienting you of what you originally know or what you were getting used to.
Yeah, maybe like an element of rewiring, you know, like I think that with another rehearsal, maybe we could get it a little bit better. But yeah, so one, I mean, I think I missed a couple in the first round, you know, like, so the connecting of like the body movement with like the word and listening and then connecting, I even missed a few there, but then definitely like in the second part, you know, sort of having to rewire a little bit my brain.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, no, dale.
I guess I was thinking about how the clapping comes with sound and the blinking doesn't, but they're both actions of putting something together, and therefore it made me feel about how blinking happens without us registering it. So being told to blink without, there's no sound, but with clapping there's sound. So anyway, just the relationship between the two acts was kind of puzzling me.
Weird, yeah, that's real. They do have like different, I don't know, textures to them, these different movements. Generally, we do it with like walk and stop. So you're walking and you're stopping, and then you're jumping and you're clapping. And even though, like Michelle, I've done this exercise, I think like 50 times, because it's one of the activities that we really like to do, because it can bring so much reflection. And I still, there hasn't been once that I've been able to like not make a mistake. And I think it's interesting to think about, yeah, like what happens when we try to rewire, like what is happening in our brain that we're paying so much attention, like we're so focused, like when we're taking those tests, like Alice was saying. But then also how, like, it's interesting how hard it is, just even with like a simple command, like rewiring takes a lot. And we're, in some ways, we're like bound to make mistakes in the process. And I'm just curious of this part of like the making mistake moment. And how did that feel for you all? Like when you were like, oh no, I had to blink and I clapped, and how was that feeling?
It was comical, right? It was funny. It's something, yeah, it's a very different approach to making the mistake, especially in this context of play, right? Where you're not like, I mean, you're focused, but you're not like, oh my God, I'm going to make a mistake. You know, you're just sort of a little bit liberated to be able to experience that. So in some of the classes that I teach, you know, we said there's no way to make a mistake. Like we often work with a pentatonic scale and some panpipes, you know, and even if you make a mistake, it blends, you know, with the rest. And getting people to appreciate not just that it's okay to make a mistake and that you can still enjoy the event, right? But sometimes we've had some very fortunate mistakes that generate something really new to the piece and very creative and beautiful. But that takes some rewiring too, you know, in terms of our concern and appreciation of mistakes.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, and I think it's like such a powerful energy to, when we're talking also about social change, making mistakes can be really heavy, right? And sometimes, you know, like making mistakes, we have to show up and own up to them, and it can be hard and painful. But how can we also engage with it in this like playful manner, and also in some ways like, you know, self-care-ish manner? And then when we think about stories, if there aren't like mistakes in a story, there's just no story. Like if everything is just perfect, like life would just be extremely boring. And the story wouldn't really make sense. So thank you all for.
There's a tradition, I don't know, it is an indigenous tradition that I'm forgetting exactly where from, but the idea that if anything is perfect, the gods take it away. So like a mistake is an essential kind of human element that keeps us separated from a divine force or something.
Oof.
Yeah,
I really like that.
Yeah, we'll be following on that.
I can look into that. I'll look into it.
That would be awesome, Richard.
Yeah. And maybe thinking about that also, you know, that for example, for the Andean musical ear, people don't like it when it's perfect pitch, perfect. People say they don't like it, you know. But how interesting that from a Western perspective, both in the notation and the listening appreciation of Andean music, when things are off pitch, supposedly, like by Western standards, they're considered to be mistakes or errant notes, right? But from an indigenous perspective, they're absolutely integral to the music making. So lots of random notes, you know, or microtones, you know, that would be considered either too sharp or too flat, you know, from a musical Western perspective. So what is a mistake? You know, like as we're thinking about what is a story, what is a mistake, and who decides whether it's a mistake or not, you know?
That also reminds me of the Japanese ceramics or chinas, like this certain ceramic where if it breaks, when they repair it, they use a certain type of red, I can't remember the type of adhesive they use to glue it back together, but also use gold powder to highlight the crack. So then the imperfection becomes something precious. Not necessarily a mistake, but yeah.
Well, what we'd like to do as basically a final activity is allow you just another meditative moment to see if you can see a given object or symbol in your life from a new perspective, and create, if nothing else, in your own imagination or in your body or however, a new story with that. And so we had asked for folks to bring, and maybe it did not reach everyone, and that would be okay, but to bring a symbol or an object that links in some way earth and education. So we're going to ask everyone to either hold that object or have it nearby, or have it nearby in here, something that you're just imagining is also fine. But take a moment to think of, if you do not have with you, this object that somehow connects earth and education. Chelsea and I are going to lead just a few minute meditation on that, asking you all to either look at the object or go inside and close your eyes. And in this process, the idea is to connect with it, and hopefully in a new way that you haven't done before. Connect with it as a symbol and realize that symbols are always providing new information to us. And in that, see if certain aspects of this story between you and the object come out of a crack that might be present. So we're going to do that, and then everybody will just have a moment to jot down a note or two about what they had in their meditation, and if anyone would like to share. We're not going to do the pair share since we're a smaller group and time is short. But if somebody would like to share, we'll kind of finish off with that and just a reflection here at the end. So hopefully everyone has their object or symbol, or has it. I see Tamron's there. Look at that. Yeah.
Is this too literal? Would this be too literal?
There's no rules on this. Yeah, it's absolutely exactly what you felt. Whatever reason you grabbed it, whatever reason it came to you, that was enough. Okay. So Chell will get us started on this.
Awesome. So once again, I'm holding it or keeping it close, or bringing it to like the presence of like your mind. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, or maybe look at your hands. And feeling this object or symbol that you've chosen, or maybe visualizing it in your mind. Taking just a moment to recognize it. Maybe starting off with like more of like a physical layer. And then think about how you interact with this object, with this symbol. Think about how your story connects with this symbol. What is it about this symbol that is also revealing of your journey with your relationship with the earth and education? Maybe like observing it as like this bond, this first connection between you and this symbol, this object. But then taking a step back and also trying to understand, or bringing to your consciousness, how does this symbol interact with this time and this space? And what are the conflicts that surround this symbol? What are the tensions? Maybe what are the wounds, and then also what is the power? What is the healing? And now we're going to shift our consciousness to another time and another space.
So as you hold this object or this symbol in your hands or in your mind's eye, allow yourself to be transported, not just to its story, but its history. And think of origins. Think of this object not as just physical, but as movement, as a verb. And feel yourself transported to some kind of origin. Where did this object come from? And as you're transporting yourself, floating or walking or swimming, or flying, sense all that's around you. How is this object interconnected with the people of this place? How are the ancestors related to this? How am I related to this object by what cannot be seen? What is hidden? The spirits? And see if I can embrace, if I can feel that which cannot be seen. And as I am embracing that feeling, allow yourself to be transported to a different time and a different place, something that we usually call the future.
So we're going to travel with this object to several generations that have come after us. How do they relate to this symbol? How is this symbol part of their story? Is this symbol still relevant? Has it been forgotten? Or has it actually become very, very powerful, very relevant? Or has it stayed as something that maybe people use but take for granted? What is the role in this new time and new space? What are the stories that are told about this symbol several generations down the line? How do our descendants relate to this symbol? Do they remember us with this symbol? And we travel one more time through time and space, coming back to our body, coming back to the physical symbol that we're touching or imagining, but once again, feeling the chair that we're sitting on. We take a deep breath in. And as we exhale, we gently open our eyes. So yeah, I know we're not giving you a lot of time to maybe like write things down or process what you just felt or went through. But we're curious if like this activity in any way affect your perception or your relationship with the symbol that you chose, but also with the idea of story. I'm just gonna start with that for now.
I can just say that the object I chose is something I made at a specific point in time, and the exercise we did, like, but I never thought much about it beyond that. I just made it, you know, like I did looping technique. I attached two rocks together. But what I just experienced was actually giving this like a huge, like a full story and a life that extended back to what inspired it. And that went back in time to another people, like an indigenous population in the middle of the United States. And because it was made in St. Louis at a time when I was excavating at Cahokia Mounds and inspired by these pottery sherds that were made by someone I didn't know. And then moving to the future, I thought about it as an art object that then inspired another iteration. So continuing on through tracking one artist's interpretation or story through visual making. So it just, yeah, that was awesome.
I was kind of surprised by how the choice of my object kind of already kind of preempted the going back and forward in time. So this is from an ash tree that fell in a park near where I live, in a place called German Village in Schiller Park. And I saw that as part of the fallen tree, I could take the part of the tree that had the description on it. And I remember my mother was visiting at the time, and she, as a child, she always talked to me about the naming of trees, and she would talk, she always seemed to have this knowledge. I didn't know where she got it from, but she always seemed to know. But then also because I used to study Latin, this idea of the naming of the tree. The poet Virgil in his Bucolics describes the fraxinus, the ash, as the insiluis pulcherrima, so like the most beautiful tree in the forest. And but at the same time, this is a tree that is probably, when it died, it was probably about between 150 and 200 years old, and so it connected me to that history before the park was created, and also from what I know of indigenous basket making and the focus of especially white ash. I mean, green ash is sometimes used too. The idea of this, and then when Chell was talking about kind of pain and kind of violence, you know, I can't help but think of this in relation to violence. You know, this is quite brutal. Like when actually kind of confronted by this, you know, the nailing into the kind of skin of the tree, the death of the tree. And there are so many kind of other elements there, but it was going back in time. And then I'm thinking in the future, wouldn't it be great if this story was not just this? Like if there was something more to the story of this being, that it wasn't just a labeling, a kind of an accounting, but maybe there could be a story about the ash that could connect us to it better than this kind of alienating series of words that are there just as a taxonomy. Also, the problem of the bug, that there's an invasive species that destroys ashes, and so whenever I bring this from the garage, I'm always a little bit kind of like, where do I put this thing? Because I feel like, anyway, like I'm always a bit sensitive about this question of the.
So continuing the theme of species that don't belong here, I don't think this belongs in Ohio, right? This probably belongs to somewhere tropical. So when I reached for this, I was really just looking for something because about land, I don't have anything too natural around me. So I just like reached for something easy. But then it revealed to me that I bought this for a reason, and it's because in my my home, I'm from Taiwan. So my home in Taiwan, we have a bunch of these. And thinking about this started to give me a sense of sadness that I didn't really think about because it's constrained. And I know that if it given the right temperature, the right weather, it will grow like crazy. But here it's a little bit sad. So yeah, and thinking about all of the different names that people give it is just one plant, but people give it so many different names. I know people call it snake plant. What else? Mother-in-law's tongue, and in Mandarin Chinese is called tiger's tail because of the. So it's just I was just thinking, and it also this is like a popular office plant because there's some luck tied to it that people think that I don't know it's a plant. So I was just thinking like, what will people come along in the future and look at this plant and want to bring it to new places and give it new meaning and new names. I was just thinking about that. Yeah.
Well, I should probably jump in. We'd love to hear from everybody, and we regret that time kind of cuts these conversations off, but hopefully we can see it more as a bridge to the next sessions, and allowing the stories that you've all dreamed to fill these cracks, and together we'll connect with them in whatever that space is. But right now, just as a way to exit this space, maybe everyone could take just a few seconds and share a word or a phrase that helps also serve as that bridge that will, because it'll be a little while before we meet again. So how are you leaving the space? And that word and phrase will also help join us into our next space that we share together. Reluctantly, hopeful, enchanted, open-minded. Story is relationship. Creating new stories. Well, thank you all for sharing the space with us again. You can always reach Chell and myself via email, and I'll put mine here in the chat, but just know that Chelsea's is the same thing, just changing Daniel to Chelsea, or Chelsea, you can also put yours in if you have questions or want to follow up. We've been engaging beyond with the Unlearning group beyond just the workshops, and so just know that we very much appreciate this space and are very open to engaging in dialogues with every one of you. So thank you again.
Thank you, Daniel and Chell. This was really amazing, profound. Like I'm walking away with something, I don't know what to describe it, but something profound, a new insight. And I just wanted to remind everyone that the way that we've structured these is that following every workshop, we dedicate one of our unlearning hours to reflecting on what we just experienced. And those spaces have been very productive in the past. So our next session on Friday, February the 5th from 1 to 2 will be a reflection on this experience of the webinar and the workshop. And then we'll be with Pachaysana. We have another unlearning hour in between, and then we'll be with Pachaysana again for the next workshop on February the 19th from 1 to 2:30. So same time, same link, and we hope to see you all back for sort of a development, what we've started here.
I'll just say one thing about the, sorry, I don't know if my connection's good. one thing about the Unlearning Hour is you get different people. And so there might be this moment where there's someone that didn't attend today, and therefore our job is to somehow kind of give an account or a reflection on what happened today. At the same time, there will be people that were part of today. So it's always it is that kind of passing on and communicating an experience. And I really like that about the way that Michelle has organized this back and forth, because it allows for people that weren't part of it to continue, or even if you can't be there next week, your experience will continue as well.
Okay, thank you everyone. And we'll see you next week for the reflection and the hour on Learning Hour, and very soon for the next workshop with Pachaysana. Hello, hi. So it looks, let me go ahead and stop recording here.